Hope he's not going in there to record something.
Well, is this all our
We're still waiting for Dr. Vega.
okay?
Hi, it's Rick. Can you guys, let's see, Melissa, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. And how about Shelby? You got me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, Shelby, can you, if it's your phone, can you turn it sideways?
Okay.
Okay, that works great.
Okay.
And we're still waiting for Dr. Russell Vega. He's a medical examiner. How's everybody doing today?
Can't complain.
All right, I'm waiting for Dr. Vega.
What time is it, Roy?
We still got some time.
Okay. It's not quarter after yet?
No.
Oh, okay. So we'll probably go for about 25 minutes once we get started. And Melissa and Shelby, I think the order that I'm going to start this with is Roy and I are going to do our own little short intro, and then we'll introduce you guys as the guests. And then I think I'll start off with the medical examiner to talk about what he's seeing in his district, which includes Manatee and Sarasota counties, and just, you know, what it's like to do an autopsy and so forth on, and get a cause of death. I'm getting a little feedback for somebody.
It's me.
Oh, that's you.
Yeah, I just came into the room.
Oh, okay. But why are we getting feedback from your headphones?
Yeah, you're hearing my
yeah,
phone.
okay. I'm talking to my co-host Roy DeJesus, and then we'll talk to Shelby about her personal experience with her brother, and then I want to move into the solutions phase. And Melissa, that's when we'll start the discussion with you, partly of, and maybe we'll kind of transition into, you know, Shelby, her brother died of a fentanyl overdose in September. And when you hear the story of her brother, it'll probably sound pretty familiar to you. You know, with the opioid dependent people that you deal with, you know, with your organization, and then we can get into, okay, what can be done? You know, how can people get the help that they need? What can family members do to try to make sure that, you know, one of their loved ones isn't, you know, overtaken by this? Any sign of
No, not yet. It's quarter after now. So.
Yeah, okay, so he'll probably log in any second.
I assume you'll want us to mute when we're not talking.
Yeah. Unless you can be really quiet.
Well, there's things beyond my control.
Yes. Right.
And just so you know, there's railroad tracks about 50 yards from me.
Okay.
If when I am not muted, the train comes by, I'm going to mute.
Okay.
I just wanted to warn you in case that happens if I'm in the middle of the stage.
Okay.
Because it's really loud. It won't last very long, but it's
Yeah.
totally beyond my control. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've got Dr. Vega. Hey, Dr. Vega, it's Rick Elmhorst from Bay News 9. Can you hear me okay? Hey, Dr. Vega, it's Rick at Bay News 9. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. And you sound and look great. So my co-host and I, Roy DeJesus, we'll start off with a short intro and kind of set up. We'll introduce you as the guests. And Dr. Vega, I'm going to start by talking to you, and then I'm going to bring in Shelby Cooper, whose brother died of a fentanyl overdose in September. And then Melissa Larkin Skinner, she's with an organization called Centerstone. They're behavior health and addiction services. And Roy, you tell me when you're ready.
Just give me a minute.
What do you say? Okay, we'll need just a second for Roy.
Hey, Bree, can you put it on something neutral? Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Roy is going to be doing his part from another studio, but he's getting ready here.
Here I am.
All right.
You guys can see and hear me, right? Yes.
Okay. So Roy, if you're ready, we're going to get started.
You're set. Go ahead and make sure that you talk for a little bit.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Hi, this is Rick Elmhorst along with Roy DeJesus, and thank you so much for listening to or watching this edition of To the Point Already. Roy, this week we're taking on the fentanyl overdose crisis. I usually don't like the word crisis. I think a lot of times it's overused, but in this case I don't. And I want to start off by reading a startling statistic. Fentanyl overdoses are now the leading cause of death for people 18 to 45. I'm going to read that again. Fentanyl overdoses are now the leading cause of death for people 18 to 45. Between 2020 and 21, 79,000 people between the ages of 18 and 45 died of fentanyl overdoses, about 37,000 in 2020 and 41,000 in 2021. It's a terrible crisis. It's actually getting worse. Roy, I have personally lost at least one relative and maybe two to a fentanyl overdose. It was devastating for the people closest to this young woman, and we'll be talking about this in the podcast. I don't know why. Maybe, I guess everything is about COVID now, and so it gets all the attention. So I'm not doing any type of like a conspiracy theory of fentanyl overdoses or deaths are being ignored for some reason other than something else is just swallowing up our attention. But come on, the leading cause of death for people 18 to 45, and it's really not talked about that much.
Yeah, Rick, and I think what you're touching on is that, and I've been reported on fentanyl overdoses for some time. I think in 2016, 17, 18, we started seeing that breaking of the 50,000, 60,000 mark of death because of these opioid overdoses. And it's an epidemic, right? And then we started kind of grabbing hold of it and trying to control it. And then the pandemic hit. And it has kind of been overlooked in the last 2 years, but the problem continues.
We've got 3 guests for this podcast to talk about it, and we're going to introduce those people now. Dr. Russell Vega, he's the medical examiner for District 12 in Florida. That includes Manatee and Sarasota counties. Shelby Cooper, her brother Ryan Cooper died of a fentanyl overdose in September at the age of just 22. And Melissa Larkin Skinner, she's with Centerstone. They're a behavioral health and addiction services organization. Thank you so much for joining us on To the Point Already.
It's an honor.
I want to start with Dr. Russell Vega. Dr. Vega, you're the guy that when somebody in your area dies of an overdose like this, their body gets brought into your facility. What have you seen in the last few years with the spike in fentanyl overdoses?
Well, I mean, your numbers, they definitely tell a story. And, we've been a part of that story here in sort of southwest central Florida. It's not like we've not had drug overdoses in the past. Drug overdoses are a significant cause of death and have been of people in the age group you described in the late teens to early 40s, for many years. Back in the 2008 to maybe 2011 period, we were dealing more with drugs like oxycodone and the problems that it was causing. And the oxycodone was finding its way, onto the streets and to people in referred to as pill mills, where there were doctors' offices and places that prescribed these drugs really without much control and regulation, and so there were a lot of them on the streets, and we were getting a lot of overdose deaths from those drugs. That tapered off after that, and I think that the dates that I mentioned before about 2014 and 2015, we started to see a rise in opioid deaths again, but this time it wasn't from prescription medications, it was from heroin. And then right after that, it started off with increasing levels of or numbers of deaths from fentanyl. And just for your audience, heroin been around forever, right? It's an injectable opioid drug made from the opium plant. Fentanyl has been around for a long time, but the amount of abuse of fentanyl in the past has really been relatively low. Fentanyl is a synthetic drug that works like morphine, same as heroin does, really. Heroin is converted to morphine in the body. That's how it has most of its effect. But heroin is of about the same potency as morphine, whereas fentanyl is much more potent, which means it takes a much lesser amount or smaller amount to cause the same effect in the body that heroin or morphine does. I guess in that way, it's not surprising that eventually, when people figured out that they could start making fentanyl inexpensively, that we started seeing more and more of it being used, or abused, I should say, as a street drug. And that really started in, say, 2015 and has just continuously escalated since that time period. We've also had problems with drugs which we call fentanyl analogs. They are drugs which are created in the laboratory similar to fentanyl, but with some changes to the structure of the molecule that make those drugs a little different. In the Sarasota Bradenton area, we had a huge wave of deaths caused by probably the most potent of these drugs that has been known, which is carfentanil. We saw 100 deaths in less than a year from that one drug alone in 2016 to 2017.
In your district?
In our district, right. Almost entirely in Sarasota and Bradenton counties. We were actually at the very crest of that wave. We saw that in the months that followed, other areas of the country started to see this drug emerging too, but we really, in the Sarasota Bradenton area, were the first in the country just about to experience that really tragic number of deaths from that drug. Since then, the fentanyl analogs have dropped off, but fentanyl has continued to rise, and we're seeing more drug overdose deaths in 2021 than we ever saw in any one year, and almost all of them, maybe that's slightly overstated, but the vast majority of them were fentanyl related. Many of them were fentanyl and other drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine, but fentanyl being the principal one.
I guess, if I could describe what's happening here in one way, it's that, let's say you've got a drug like heroin. The people who use and abuse heroin, they kind of know what they're doing, and some of them, they use it for decades. It destroys their lives, but they kind of carry on. With fentanyl, because it is so powerful, your margin for error when you're going to somehow give yourself fentanyl is so low that if you make a little mistake in the dose, you just end up dead. And this is where I want to bring in the story of one of my relatives. She apparently had, and I wasn't close to her, but she had heroin addiction problems. And she would even put stuff about it on Facebook about how terrible heroin was. She was trying to beat it. She ended up going to jail because of it. A few days after she got out of jail, she met up with another relative who apparently had issues as well. And they were at McDonald's. She went into the bathroom. She collapsed. She was taken to the hospital and pronounced dead a few days later. Here is a young woman that otherwise was perfectly healthy. She's dead. You see the dead bodies that come into your facility. You know how terrible it is. A lot of these people, they're perfectly fine, except for they overdose on fentanyl. How angry does that make you? Or what kind of emotion do you feel when you see this happening so often?
Well, it makes me sad more than anything else because you know, in doing this work, we deal with all the people that are, or at least many of the people that are affected. We're directly dealing with the family members of the deceased here, and so we appreciate firsthand the devastating effect that these deaths have on the people around the victims of drug abuse. And it's also if there's an anger component, it's really because we know that maybe in the big picture, all of these deaths could potentially be preventable. And the fact that we haven't gotten to that point where we're able to effectively prevent so many of these deaths is troubling. You know, the scenario you described, unfortunately, is pretty common. And the deaths that occur in somebody who starts back again after having been off for a little while, like being in jail,
Right?
is just a really common scenario because what happens is the body develops tolerance to the drugs over time and is able to take larger doses of drug. Then when you go off the drugs, like when you're in jail, the body loses that tolerance. So if you start using the drug again, especially at the level that you were using it at, or at least the level you think you were using it at, before you had to go cold turkey from the jail, your body's not able to handle that level anymore, and it can cause overdose much more easily.
Real quickly, on a technical level, I guess, when somebody overdoses on fentanyl, what happens to their bodily systems and causes them to die?
So, you know, fentanyl, like other opioids, is a central nervous system depressant, which means it causes a lot of the activities in your brain to slow down, and that includes your cardiorespiratory centers, especially with the opioids, your respiratory part of that, the respiratory centers. So it causes your breathing to slow down, and at some point, your breathing simply stops. You go into respiratory arrest. That's the most common or likely sort of lethal mechanism for these drugs.
Roy and I are actually in separate studios right now. And Roy, did you want to ask the doctor a question?
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard something like this, where opioids, took away a young life. I was at the University of Florida. This was the late '90s, and back then, as you mentioned, doctor, it was oxycodone, but it was very new, right? And one of the guys at the university, fraternity, took way too much drink and took a pill and never woke up. And so this is a problem that has had some time to build up to the level where fentanyl is now. I think the numbers that we're talking about, you mentioned how, they're in the same family, but the fentanyl, the synthetic opioid fentanyl is 50 to 100 times more potent than either morphine or about something that is extremely addictive because of its potency. Right?
Sure. I mean, all those drugs are addictive because of the effects they have, and the potency. I think principally, like you said, it makes it that much more dangerous because you have much less room for error or margin for variation. And I think especially when the fentanyl first really started ramping up, there were a lot of cases where the fentanyl was a component of a drug mixture that a lot of people thought they were getting heroin without any fentanyl in it. They might not have even known about fentanyl at that time. And having a little bit of very potent fentanyl mixed in with heroin makes that heroin much more dangerous. And we definitely saw cases of overdose occurring in folks who had a drug mixture and who probably were unaware that they were getting a mixture with fentanyl and probably thought they were just getting heroin. But we're still seeing that, but not so much with heroin. We're seeing fentanyl mixed with cocaine and methamphetamine, which are different drugs. They act differently than opioids do, but they still are very dangerous in combination with fentanyl.
I want to talk to Shelby Cooper now. Your brother, your beloved brother, died of a fentanyl overdose. And first of all, I want to say I'm very sorry for what happened to him and how it's devastated your family. How did your brother get mixed up with fentanyl in the first place?
Well, one thing I really want to make known is that he was not seeking out fentanyl. He was purchasing online through the dark web counterfeit pills, and he was not aware that they contained fentanyl. And he first had his mix of pills when he was probably about 13 years old. He was prescribed an opioid after a surgical procedure. And I think that was the start of his addiction. And it was a long battle. And he was purchasing them online, and it contained fentanyl.
Shelby, this problem that your brother had with opioids, obviously he kept it secret for a while. Eventually, you and the rest of the family learned about his addiction, and there was this long back and forth thing of trying to keep him off of these drugs. You were his older sister, and you took this special interest in him, like his protector. What was the situation like for years with your brother trying to keep him off of opioids?
It was devastating. It completely teared my family apart. It was hard to watch him doing this to himself, and we were seeking out treatment centers. We were looking into resources. We were always trying to find the next solution, and it felt that he was at times working one step ahead of us to either avoid the help or to hide things. And I just think it came down to he was not ready for the help.
I think sometimes because we view drugs as something, immoral if people take them because they're abusing them. In my way of thinking, there's so many stories like your brother's where he had a legitimate reason for an opioid and he got addicted. I just don't think that the human brain, our physiology, is set up to withstand these drugs. Normal people who are not just looking for a high, get addicted to these things, and then because of the shame that they feel, they hide it. And that makes it worse. How much of the problem do you think that families face, individuals face, Shelby, is because we've stigmatized people's addiction to these drugs? We call it abuse or whatever. and then the people are hiding what they're doing, and that doesn't help at all.
Right. I mean, he definitely was hiding his drug use, and he was also diagnosed bipolar, and that had a stigma as well, that he did not want to seek out help because he did not want to have a mental health issue. He didn't want to be known as an addict per se. And he just was very adamant that this was not his problem. It wasn't him. That's not something he was facing. And he would try to tell us this, and, you know, we could tell that it wasn't true. As we watched his life unravel, we saw that he definitely did have an issue and needed help.
So what you believe happened is that your brother, he'd gotten used to ordering opioids, off the dark web, and then he got something with fentanyl in it and didn't know it, and that's what killed him.
Yes, exactly. I definitely know that he was not trying to die. He did not plan to take these pills and for his life to end. My mom was actually the one who found him when she came home from work one day, and the water was still running in the bathroom. He was planning to wash his face, or maybe he had just washed his face, and he collapsed on the floor. So it wasn't uncommon for him to take these pills and then lay down and watch TV, go to sleep. But that day, there was fentanyl in one of them, and it killed him.
Melissa Larkin Skinner is with Centerstone Behavioral Health and Addiction Services. Melissa, I think these stories probably sound horribly familiar to you.
They do. Everything that Dr. Vega talked about, and that Shelby related regarding her brother's unfortunately common. We've been dealing with this in Florida and in Sarasota, especially since the mid 2010s, I guess you could say, and trying to find solutions. And we've had some success as our community have banded together, but fentanyl seems to persist. And I think part of it is, based on everything that's already been talked about, people aren't necessarily seeking out fentanyl. Fentanyl is showing up in everything else, and unfortunately robbing people of the rest of their lives. So it's almost playing Russian roulette, taking any illicit drug at this point, because whoever is manufacturing it is putting fentanyl in it.
And they don't give a damn, do they?
Well, no. They only care about money, right? I mean, that's what they've always cared about, is money. And then putting fentanyl in it because of its potency, I mean, it on the one hand, it makes no sense. If you look at it from a purely business standpoint, it doesn't make any sense, because your market is dwindling, right? When people die, you're losing your market. But at the same time, they're doing it and taking a chance on it because it's so potent. People keep going back for whatever that is to get. I mean, addiction is partly all about chasing that high, right? That first high. And even the people who don't start out because they're looking for a mood or mind-altering drug, like Shelby's brother, he had a legitimate medical issue. He was prescribed something that is addictive. He became addicted to it. The drug starts to take over. It takes over the brain, and it says, hey, I need this drug, and you need the drug more than you need anything else, more than you need people in your life, more than you need food and drink and shelter. It's all about getting your hands on that drug. I mean, that is the physiology of our body.
Melissa, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we're kind of running out of time, but Roy and I wanted to do this podcast for two reasons. One, a warning. We want people to know about this, so hopefully they'll still stay clear of fentanyl, not even give it a try, and maybe offer some advice and hope to those people who are addicted to opioids or even fentanyl and their family members. Real quick, some advice for people who are addicted they're tempted time and again, and maybe to the family members who are trying, or loved ones who are trying to help someone?
So the hope is there is treatment and people recover every day. Everyone's journey is different, so it's not going to look the same. But organizations like Centerstone and others are throughout Florida and throughout the U.S. And the hope is to seek them out. And there may be a relapse the first time, there may be a relapse 50 times, but not to ever give up, not to ever give up seeking recovery and getting sober and becoming abstinent.
Hey, Roy, real quick, how much time do you think we have left?
We got about 5 minutes.
Okay, Roy, you want to add?
I wanted to ask Dr. Vega and also you, Dr. Vega alluded to hopefully we can prevent all of this. What are the best ways to get to that point? So we're talking about, offering more methadone, right? This is a different drug that having people get out of that addiction. Having Narcan completely widely available for the first responders that are having to deal with a lot of overdoses. Well, what are the best practices to try to get to that prevention? Because we can't get there in one day, right? We have to take these things.
Well, I agree with that, and I do feel like I need to say that I'm not an addiction treatment specialist, right? I see the end point of it, so I think that gives me some insight. But one of the primary things that I think we can appreciate is that this is not a single solution problem. This is a problem that needs to be addressed from various different perspectives. It's not just a supply problem, right? You can't just solve this problem by making sure that the fentanyl, which is being produced illicitly in China, can't find its way into the United States. That's not going to solve the problem. It will help some, but it's not going to solve it. It's a problem that needs to be addressed by whatever can be done to decrease the demand for these drugs. That means getting fewer people addicted in the first place by optimal prescribing practices. It means that the people who are at risk for addiction in society need to have the resources they need to be able to find alternatives and ways of managing their lives to avoid addiction when possible. And when people become addicted, they need to have resources so that they can have that addiction treated. And for those who find themselves in overdose situations, the ready availability of things like Narcan and other treatments is really a critical point. There's no question about the fact that when Narcan became widely available both to the public and to first responders, that people's lives were being saved, at least in the short term. Unfortunately, I can also say that we've seen cases where people were saved 2 or 3 times. The third or fourth time was the time that they didn't make it. So none of those things is a single solution.
Ms. Skinner, what do you think?
So education. People didn't know opioids were addictive years ago, and they would take them as prescribed and become addicted. So educating people, educating everyone, the fact that fentanyl can be in anything. It's not even just going to be in heroin or any kind of pills at this point. It can be in methamphetamines and cocaine that we see all the time. Also, Narcan should be widely available. It's not harmful in any way, so people should be able to access it. And if you think there's any chance someone might overdose using it, it comes with instructions. It's easy, really, to use. And then knowing Florida has a Good Samaritan law, so that if someone seems to have overdosed, calling, no matter what situation you are in, calling the authorities or 911 to get help for that person, not just leaving them because it was a terrible thing to do. And then, of course, there's treatment. So getting people into treatment and giving them hope and medication, methadone, Suboxone, buprenorphine, all of those things have become extremely helpful and much more widely available than they used to be. And it does, in fact, help people become abstinent from using those illicit opioids or
All right.
prescribed opioids.
All right, Shelby, I'm going to give you the final 20 seconds.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that there are definitely things out there to help if someone's addicted to opioids. It's really important to have Narcan in the house or on you, and it's available at isavefl.com for free. You can get it from any of the providers on that website.
All right, Dr. Russell Vega, Shelby Cooper, and Melissa Larkin Skinner, thank you so much for joining us on To the Point Already.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great job, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Say something real quick.
Yep. This is the point made section of To the Point Already, where Roy DeJesus and I are breaking down our thoughts on the podcast point by point. Roy, my point made is if you have problems with opioids, if you have a family member who has problems with opioids, get help. Don't let the shame and embarrassment of having an opioid problem stop you from getting help.
Yeah, and I think that to my point, throughout the conversation when we're talking about epidemics, words like problems, issues, at the end of the day, this comes down to a person. And we have to see the person. We have to see what we can do to help the person. And we have to talk about it. That's why we're having this conversation. It's becoming incredibly difficult more when we have the mixture of drugs with fentanyl, these cocktails of fentanyl, and that's only going to make the problem worse. But if we talk about it and we put it up front, we'll make sure it doesn't get over.
Awesome.